Hello, I want to welcome you to the discussion on social institutions. This is the first lecture we are going to have on this unit, and at our introduction, we want to understand the following as far as social institutions are concerned. One, we want to understand the meaning of social institutions. Second, we will look at the characteristics or features that is common to all social institutions, regardless of the type and where they are based. And then finally, we will look at the overall functions of social institutions. Once again, I want to remind you to take note of any issue that you may consider not clear, so that we may spare time during our physical classes, so that we can create time and discuss them further. Welcome to this important discussion. Before we define what social institutions are, I want us to have some preliminary observations on this subject. And I need to observe that the survival of any society over time is based on its ability to meet certain basic needs. Of course, from our other studies, we know basic needs to be three: food, shelter, and clothing. However, in this context, these basic needs go beyond what we ordinarily know as basic needs. For instance, they include the addition of new members in the population to replace those members who have died or migrated. We know, for instance, that in every society, we lose some members through death, while others migrate to other places permanently. And as a result, the number of people living in a given area is reduced. So to ensure that we have enough members moving forward, those who have moved away or those who have died have to be replaced. We also need to clothe, shelter, and feed members through the activities of production, distribution, as well as consumption of goods and services. Indeed, production of goods and services takes place at one point, and therefore they have to be transported to areas where consumers are available. That has to be done. Otherwise, people might not survive due to lack of food, lack of basic services, among other things. We also need to educate and socialize young people. We also need to care and nurture those who are sick, those who are elderly, and those who are frail, as well as ensure that there is law and order in society. Otherwise, a society that has no order cannot survive for a long time, as people will fight each other until there is nothing remaining. Again, all these things, we need them for the survival of any society. The provision or the satisfaction of all these things that I've mentioned, it is done through social institutions. This is important for us to understand just in terms of preliminary observations. What then is a social institution? A social institution has been defined differently, so we want to focus on two definitions. One, a social institution is defined as a system of statuses, roles, values, and norms that is organized to satisfy basic societal needs. We can also understand a social institution as an interrelated system of social roles and social norms that are organized around the satisfaction of important social needs. What comes out in these two particular definitions is that when we talk about social institution, we are basically talking about coordinated activities that are designed or that are geared towards enabling human beings to satisfy important needs that they need for their own survival. And this organization is done in cognizance of the roles, the values, and the norms of any given society. So, when we talk about social institution, we simply mean structures that exist in our societies that are organized and driven by certain values and norms, and whose aim is to enable humanity to satisfy basic needs. Traditionally, sociologists have recognized 5 major social institutions. These are the family, the economy, politics, education, and religion. These have been the traditional social institutions. However, in recent years, sociologists have also noted the development of new social institutions. They are sports, medicine, and the media. In our discussion, we will attempt to focus first on the traditional social institutions, that is, the family, the economy, politics, education, and religion. However, because of the prominence and the importance of sports and media, we will also spare some time in this course to look at sports and media as emerging social institutions. But I also want to encourage students to look at health and medicine. This became even more prominent and important, especially with the emergence of COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, it brought the entire society to a standstill. And the most important people that society used to wage the war against COVID-19 was were the doctors and health professionals. So I also want to ask students to spend some time and read health and medicine, especially what we call social epidemiology. It is quite important and relevant, especially in the era of COVID-19. Let's now turn our attention to the characteristics of social institutions. One is that social institutions are resistant to change. This does not mean that they don't change. They indeed change, but any change in social institution takes so many years, sometimes across several generations. This is because the patterns of social behavior that are institutionalized in society, they are reinforced by customs and traditions. And developing these behaviors and having them accepted as part and parcel of societal values and norms takes quite so many years. And because of that, changing them similarly takes a lot of years. Yes, changing, I said it earlier on that changing these patterns of behavior take quite a lot of time, because society is normally reluctant at changing practices that it is used to. Part of it is fear of the unknown. And therefore, when we change certain behaviors, they are resisted, especially if there are fears that it is likely to revolutionize or do away with certain structures, institutions, or customs or behaviors that as members of society we are used to. For instance, in the institution of the family, marriage has been institutionalized to mean a union between a man and a woman. Indeed, recent years we have witnessed the emergence of same-sex unions, and they are indeed facing a lot of resistance. This is because traditionally what society has been used to is heterosexual unions, that is, a union of a man and a woman. So when members of the same sex now engage in a marriage relationship, people find it a bit strange, a bit queer, and in many societies it has been resisted. Although it has had partial acceptance in the Western world, in Africa this type of union is highly abhorred, and some countries have even gone ahead to ban them through legislation. This is just a demonstration that changing social institutions is never easy, because every change is resisted. Another important characteristic of social institutions is that they are interdependent. That is, a society's institutions uphold similar values and norms to reflect compatible goals and priorities. There is no single social institution that is absolutely independent of the other social institutions. Why is this interdependence important? Interdependence is important in the sense that it helps in fostering checks and balances society. This is to ensure that no single social institution becomes overbearing and therefore gains absolute prominence and significance over the others. If, for instance, today the government wants to introduce certain family planning methods or certain medication or medical practices, then it has to seek the concurrence of the institution of the family and the institution of religion. Otherwise, they will resist them, and in the process, they may not have any meaningful impact on society. Indeed, the church has been vocal against certain family planning practices that the government over the years have tried to implement. And many times, the government has to go slow on them, persuade the church, and explain to the church leadership that the intended medical practices are in no way encouraging promiscuity or immorality. Since the church is a guardian, or religion is a moral guardian of society, it must always be concerned about any changes that the government wants to introduce the family that it thinks is likely to expose society into immorality and also acts that go against the moral principles of the church. Therefore, many times the religious institution has stood firm in opposing certain changes that it finds that government might impose. This means therefore that for any change in any social institution to occur, then it means that it must, as much as possible, ensure that other social institutions understand what it wants to do, and it addresses all the fears that other institutions might have regarding the planned change. Another important characteristics of social institutions is that they change together. That is, a change in one social institution necessitates changes in other social institutions. This is partly because, as we had noted earlier, social institutions are interdependent, and therefore, when you change certain aspects in one social institution, it is likely to have an influence and occasion similar changes in other social institutions. For instance, if we have changes in family values that result in it will result in appropriate changes in other institutions. Take for instance the case of fashion. If certain dressing type is not appreciated by the institution of the family, it will force the economic institution, that is, the fashion shows, to also change in terms of the kind of fashion they make, because they don't want to make fashion that the institution of the family consider offensive and therefore may not consume. As an economic institution, you want to produce goods and services that you consider appropriate and members of the family or society are likely to buy, so that the proceeds you get from their sale facilitates further production. To the extent that certain fashion is not appreciated and is abhorred by the individual family, it is not possible for the economic institution or the entrepreneurs to continue engaging in the production of a particular good that is already disregarded by other institutions. Same thing, if for instance members of the family decide now start preferring smaller size families, that is giving birth to fewer children, it may affect the number of enrollments in our institutions of learning. Conversely, if there is increase in population because now members of the family value having so many children, then that increased population will necessitate adjustments in our institutions of learning to expand their learning facilities to accommodate the increasing population. This means, therefore, when an institution changes, it affects other institutions, and other institutions must make appropriate adjustments in order to cope with the changes that are being witnessed in other social institutions. Another characteristic of social institutions is that they are sites of social problems. What this means is that human social problems are specific to particular social institutions. For example, unemployment is a problem of the economy as a social institution. Same-sex relations and infidelity are problems of the family. Crime and political violence are problems of the political and legal institutions. Religious fundamentalism, or what we call extremism, and false prophecy are problems of religion, while hooliganism, doping, and match fixing are problems of the institution of sport. These problems arise when social institutions do not function properly or are not in harmony with the social needs. This is important because we must understand that a problem that is traceable to a given social institution needs to be addressed by that particular social institution. For instance, if there is poor officiating of matches, soccer matches or games, and in the process certain teams win in what the opponent considers unfair, and a decision is made that the referee is arrested and arraigned in court, that might not solve the problem of poor officiating, because we are taking a problem that belongs to the institution of sport and trying to resolve it through the institution of the political institution, unless it is being seen as one that's affecting the orderly functioning of the institution of sport. Otherwise, that problem needs to be addressed by the institution of sport. They need either to retrain the referees, they need to fine the referees that do not officiate matches well, they need to demote referees that are found culpable to lower leagues, or at times they need to completely ban referees from officiating matches. That way, the problem can be resolved. So that every problem that belongs to a given social institution has to be addressed by that particular social institution. Things such as same-sex relations and infidelity are problems of the family. Even if cases of same-sex relations and infidelity are occasionally leading to violence and are taken over by the political institution through the police and other law enforcement agencies. That is simply but a temporary measure. Otherwise, the long-term measure of addressing infidelity has to be done by the institution of the family, because that is where the problem is domiciled, and that is where the source of the problem is. It is where the problem is rooted, and for that problem to go, it has to be uprooted from the institution of the family by members of the family. Another important characteristic of social institutions is universality. Universality means that social characteristics are found in all parts of the world and in all societies. That is to say that every society has a social institution in one way or the other. It is however important to note that some of these social institutions may be more advanced in some societies and less elaborate in others. However, there has to be an element of the existing social society, even though they may exist in rudimentary form. Take, for instance, an institution like sports. Sports, such as soccer, exist in some form in all countries and in all societies. However, they are more developed, more advanced, more elaborate in some societies and in some countries than others. For example, the Western world, in Europe generally, and Latin America, countries such as Brazil, Colombia, and Argentina have more elaborate sports activities such as soccer. The same cannot be said to countries such as Africa, where sports is still, especially soccer, is still developing. However, what remains to be understood here is that they exist in Africa and they exist in other countries, even though in some countries they may be more advanced than others. It's also important to observe that universality also means that the rules governing these institutions are also universal. For instance, regardless where soccer is played, a standard team must have 10 outfield players and a goalkeeper. Substitutions have a minimum number that can be done. Cautioning and expulsion from the field, the rules are the same. There could be debates regarding whether certain mistakes made by a player in the field are worth being punished in form of yellow card or a red card. But the rule is there are only 2 cards that can be issued to a player, a yellow and a red card. Again, all soccer matches must have a center referee and at least assistant referees, which many times we call as the linesmen. Again, the rules governing soccer is that they must be of single gender. So rarely do we have a competitive soccer game where we have men and women constituting a team. So that is just to demonstrate that all societies have social institutions, although some societies, some of these institutions are more elaborate than others. But the bottom line is they exist in all societies, even though they are more complex in societies and quite simple in others. Another important characteristic of social institutions is that they have multiple roles. Multiple roles imply that each social institution has two broader types of functions. These are primary and secondary functions. Primary and secondary functions of these institutions are also called manifest and latent functions, respectively. These functions enable social institutions to fulfill important needs of members in society. Take, for instance, the case of education as a social institution. The primary function of educational institution, is to train and impart important skills that learners need. That remains the most important function of a social institution. That is now the primary function, or what we call the manifest function. They are the functions for which an educational institution was established for. However, education as a social institution also has indirect functions, or what we call secondary functions. For instance, they help in shaping individuals' behavior because students or learners are required to observe certain rules, and these rules help in building the character of a learner and enabling them to submit to authority and observe rules and regulations governing that institution, which and such habits are normally cascaded by learners to other social institutions. Again, quite a number of married people today, their first meeting point was in an educational institution. In that case, therefore, marriage serves as a marketing place for future marital partners. It should be, however, noted that meeting and then dating, which eventually may graduate into marriage, was not the primary function of that particular social institution. But over the years, it has played an important role in bringing together people of different sexes and establishing a relationship, some of which grow and graduate into marriage. So every social institution, when looked at, has two functions. One, the primary function, or what we call the latent function. These are the main institutions, rather the main functions for which a social institution was established for. However, they also play subsidiary functions, or what we call latent or hidden functions, like the one I've explained about the institution of education. All social institutions have norms and regulations. That is, all social institutions have established procedures that are governed by norms which prescribe the ways of doing and acting in those particular institutions. People or individuals are therefore socialized to accept and follow norms and regulations that are established in these institutions. Failure to abide by the established norms and regulations may lead to sanctions, which may range from verbal reprimand, ridicule, to severe punishments, such as ostracism and death. For example, if we take the case of educational institutions, all educational institutions have rules governing examinations. These rules require that a given exam is done for a given period of time, 2 hours, 3 hours, and so on. Every learner is required to have covered a given number of hours in terms of preparing to sit for exams, and all learners are required to observe certain rules when they are undertaking certain exams. For instance, cheating or copying exams is not permitted in all educational institutions. Now, what then happens if these rules are violated? For instance, If the punishment, rather, if the violation is not all that severe, then uh, a learner might simply be reprimanded through verbal or written warning. However, there are instances in which the violation of institutional rules may lead to suspension of studies. For instance, if a student engages in a theft or in fights or in activities that an educational institution consider inappropriate, such a student may be given suspension, that is, to stay away from the school for a given period of time, after which they can now resume their studies. Or in some instances where violations are so serious, such as cheating in exams, such students may be completely expelled and their studies in such institutions completely discontinued. Of course, these rules, they apply at all levels, right from childhood, rather early childhood education, primary education, secondary education, up to tertiary education. Learners are required to observe all these rules. The same rules apply to the social institutions. For instance, in sports, in media, in the economy, in the family. All social institutions are governed by certain rules. These rules must be respected, and their violation is obviously subject to punishment. Having looked at having looked at the characteristics of social institutions, let us now turn our attention to the functions of social institutions. It should be recalled that no institution is created if it does not have important functions that it plays in society. In this discussion, as part of introduction of social institutions, we basically went to look at the general functions of the social institutions. The specific functions of these social institutions, we will look at them when we're now handling each of the social institutions that we had mentioned earlier. One of the functions of social institutions is directing human behavior and relationship. This function is achieved through the family and kinship ties. Family and kinship networks are where children grow up and receive their primary socialization. Families achieve this goal through affection, care, companionship, as well as provision of love and intimate relationship to members. Families also help in the reproduction status positions through inheritance of social institutions. So what we're saying here is that it is the role of social institutions to direct human behavior and to help in cultivating a good relationship between and among the members. The primary function, the primary institution that is charged with directing human behavior and building strong human relationships is the institution of the family. Social institutions are also charged with the transmission and calibration of knowledge. That is, educational and training institutions help in the transmission and cultivation of knowledge, abilities, as well as specialized skills. Educational and training institutions have both manifest, that is, main or direct, as well as latent or indirect or implied functions. Manifest functions include the learning of skills, development of competencies in learners, and knowledge in important areas of life, while the latent functions include the cultural transmission, social control, as well as promotion of social integration. These functions are important, and as we are going to look at them again later, when we are looking at the institution of education, they will come out even more clearly. The other important function of social institutions is production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. This function is achieved through the economic and labor market institutions. These institutions ensure continuous production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. A society's economic institution is determined by technological development and government regulations of the economy. For instance, capitalist and socialist societies have divergent drivers of the economy, more so in the areas of property ownership, ownership of the means of production, and the role of government in the economy. Again, these types of economic systems and their major characteristics will come out clearly when we're looking at the economy as a social institution. So for now, what we have is just to look at the general functions. Otherwise, when we'll be looking at the institution of the economy combined with the institution of the state, we will be in a better position to understand how production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services is carried out under the economic institution. Provision for the legitimate use of power is yet another important function of social institutions. This function is achieved through the political institutions. The political institutions include the state and its organs, such as parliament, the legislature, the police, the military, as well as the judiciary. All these institutions combined together, they constitute what we call the political institutions. These institutions, they mainly focus on the protection against external threats and upholding of the internal social order. Indeed, as we noted earlier, we cannot have a society that thrives if there is no order, if what characterizes it is violence. So, it is the role of the political institution to ensure that human beings or members of society are protected against external threats, and also there is the internal social order in that particular country. These institutions include the political parties, the trade unions and associations, lobby groups, law and other institutions, among others. All these institutions, they make up what we call the political institution, and all together they help in ensuring that power is legitimately used, order is maintained, and society is protected from external attacks or external threats. Social institutions also help the regulation of our relations with supernatural and the transmission of meaning. Institutions and domains of culture, media, and regulation are responsible for the transmission of context of meaning, value, orientation, as well as symbolic codes. For centuries, religious institutions have had a monopoly here. However, in the 20th century, institutions in the sphere of mass media and casual production began to convey values, norms, and symbolic codes, reaching broad segments of the population. Indeed, functions such as entertainment, leisure are also being provided by the media as well as the institution of sport. All together, they help us in ensuring that we live a more relaxed life, we entertain, and we can exercise our leisure time in a manner that psychologically nourishes us, and also in a way that builds cohesion, builds understanding, and builds harmony between different members of society. Up to that point, we have come to the end of the introductory area on social institutions. Still, I want to urge you that whoever has an issue that's not clear, or one that he or she feels we need to spend more time to discuss, kindly note it down and raise it when we have our face-to-face lectures. Thank you for listening.